Welcome back to Night Visitors. Tonight we're heading to Alaska's smallest towns, where 7 ordinary people discovered that isolation can be deadly in ways you'd never imagine. A park ranger, a mechanic, a store manager, a bus driver, a librarian, a cook, a janitor. Just regular folks trying to make a living in places where winter darkness swallows the sun for months, where your nearest neighbor might be miles away, and where help isn't coming. These people thought they knew their towns. They thought they knew the risks of living in America's last frontier. But what they found changed everything. Something was watching, something was waiting, and something was very, very hungry. These aren't made-up stories. These are documented accounts from people who lived through nightmares that most of us can't even imagine. If you're ready to dive into the darkest corners of small-town America, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because Night Visitors brings you true horror stories you won't forget. Now kill those lights and get comfortable, because what happens in Alaska's forgotten towns will keep you up tonight. My name is Jake Morrison, and I've been a park ranger for 12 years. I started right out of college at Yellowstone, then moved to the Grand Canyon, and finally ended up at Denali National Park in Alaska 3 years ago. I know these mountains better than my own backyard. I've rescued lost hikers, tracked down poachers, and spent weeks alone in the wilderness without breaking a sweat. I thought I'd seen everything these parks could throw at me. But what happened in October 2023 inches, a place called Devil's Canyon, changed everything I thought I knew about what's really out there in the dark. Denali covers over 6 million acres, and I work the northern section, AT, the most remote part of the park. It's my territory because I don't mind being alone for days at a time. Most rangers hate this assignment. The nearest backup is 40 miles away, and cell service is non-existent. But I love it out here. The silence, the clean air, the feeling that you're the only person for hundreds of miles. My typical day starts at 5 a.m. I check weather reports, review trail conditions, and plan my patrol route. I carry a GPS unit, satellite radio, emergency beacon, first aid kit, and enough supplies for 3 days. Standard procedure is to check in every 12 hours with base camp. If I miss 2 check-ins, they send a helicopter. October in Alaska is brutal. Temperatures drop to 20 below, snow can start without warning, and daylight only lasts about 8 hours. Most tourists clear out by September, leaving just serious hikers and hunters with proper permits. That's why what started happening in Devil's Canyon was so weird. Devil's Canyon got its name from early gold miners who said strange things happened there. It's a 10-mile stretch of rugged terrain with thick forest, steep cliffs, and a river that runs black even in summer. The Alaskan tribes have always avoided it, but I figured that was just old superstition. On October 3rd, dispatch called me about a missing hiking group. 3 experienced guys from Montana who'd been planning this trip for 2 years. They had all the right gear, proper permits, and detailed maps. They were supposed to check in from Devil's Canyon 3 days earlier, but never made contact. The next day, we got another report. A father and son from Colorado, both Eagle Scouts, missing in the same general area. Then, a week later, a solo hiker, IDFCO, an ex-Marine with survival training, IDO, vanished near the northern edge of Devil's Canyon. 3 separate groups, all experienced outdoorsmen, all missing in the same 10-mile radius. That doesn't just happen. Bears don't take down whole groups without leaving massive blood trails. Weather hadn't been that bad. Something was very wrong. I hiked into Devil's Canyon on October 15th with enough supplies for 5 days. The plan was simple. Find their last known campsites, look for clues, and figure out what happened to 9 missing people. I found the first campsite on day 2. It belonged to the guys from Montana. Their site was near the river, sheltered by trees, a good spot that showed they knew what they were doing. But something had torn their camp apart. Their 3 tents were shredded, like someone had taken a chainsaw to them. But these weren't random cuts. The tiers were made by something with claws big enough to rip through heavy canvas in single swipes. I've seen bear damage before. This wasn't bears. The weird part was their gear. Sleeping bags, backpacks, cooking equipment, everything was still there, just destroyed. Nobody takes expensive camping gear and then destroys it. Thieves would steal it. Animals would scatter it looking for food. This looked like something had gone into a rage and just ripped everything apart. I documented everything with my camera and GPS unit, marking the exact location, standard procedure for a potential crime scene. But when I tried to upload the photos to headquarters, my satellite uplink kept failing. The connection would start, then cut out after a few seconds. That night, I set up camp about a mile from the destroyed site. I put my back to a large boulder and kept my campfire burning bright. My satellite radio crackled with static, but I managed to get through to dispatch around 10 p.m. Base, this is Ranger Morrison. I'm at the first site. Looks like animal attack, but the damage pattern is unusual. Equipment destroyed but not taken. Requesting backup for full investigation. Copy that, Morrison. Weather's moving in tomorrow. Can you wrap up and head out by noon? Negative. I need at least 2 more days to check the other sites. Your call. Stay safe out there. The radio went dead, and I couldn't get them back. I found the footprints the next morning near the riverbank. At first, I thought they were human. They had the basic shape, heel, arch, 5 toes. But they were huge. 18 inches long and almost 8 inches wide. The toes were stretched out, elongated, with deep claw marks at the tips. I've tracked everything from elk to grizzly bears. I know every animal print in Alaska. These didn't match anything in any field guide. They were pressed deep into the muddy ground. Whatever made them had to weigh at least 400 pounds. The prints led away from the destroyed campsite and disappeared into the forest. I followed them for about a quarter mile before losing the trail on rocky ground, but I found something else that made my blood run cold. Scratches on the trees. Deep gouges carved into the bark about 9 feet off the ground. Some animal had been marking its territory, but the scratches were made by something with fingers, not paws. The marks looked almost like letters, but I couldn't make out what they said. I tried calling dispatch again, but my radio was completely dead. The GPS was working, but it kept showing my location jumping around randomly. One minute it said I was in Devil's Canyon, the next it claimed I was 50 miles south in a completely different part of the park. That afternoon, I found the second campsite. Same story, tents destroyed, gear shredded, no sign of the people. But this time, I found bones scattered around the area. Not human bones, thankfully. They looked like they came from deer or elk. But something had cracked them open to get at the marrow, and there were teeth marks on every piece. The teeth marks were from something with a jaw much bigger than any wolf or bear. The bite radius had to be at least 8 inches across. I took pictures and measurements, but the more evidence I gathered, the more impossible this whole situation became. I hiked back toward the ranger station on my 4th day, planning to get back up and return with a full search team. But I got lost. The trail I'd taken into Devil's Canyon was gone. I spent 6 hours hiking in circles before finally admitting I was turned around. That's when I met Tommy Crowfeather, an Athabascan elder who was checking his trap lines near the canyon's edge. He took one look at where I'd come from and shook his head. "You shouldn't be in there, Ranger. That place is cursed." "Sir, I'm investigating some missing hikers. Have you seen anything unusual in the area?" Tommy's expression got serious. "The hungry ghost is awake again. We told the Park Service years ago to close that area, but nobody listens to the old stories anymore." He explained that according to tribal legend, a white trapper named Samuel Brennan had gotten trapped in Devil's Canyon during the winter of 1847. Food ran out, his hunting partner died, and Brennan slowly went insane from hunger and isolation. When the spring thaw came, searchers found Brennan's cabin filled with human bones, in tons full. He'd eaten his partner, then started digging up graves from an old native burial ground. "The spirits cursed him," Tommy said. "Turned him into something that's always hungry, always hunting. We call it the Wendigo. Every few decades, people start disappearing in that canyon. The creature feeds, grows stronger, then goes back to sleep. I'm a man of science. I don't believe in ghosts or curses." But Tommy described the tracks I'd found with perfect accuracy, including details I hadn't told anyone. The 18-inch footprints, the claw marks, the territorial scratches on trees 9 feet high. "How many people has it killed?" I asked. "Dozens over the years. Maybe more. It gets smarter each time it feeds. Learns to use their voices, their memories. The Park Service always covers it up, calls them bear attacks or getting lost in the wilderness." Tommy drew me a map showing how to get out of the canyon safely. "Don't go back in there alone, Ranger. That thing has been watching you since you arrived." I should have listened to Tommy's warning. I should have called for backup and let someone else handle the investigation. But 9 people were missing, and I had a job to do. I couldn't live with myself if more hikers disappeared while I was running scared from old stories. I restocked my supplies and hiked back into Devil's Canyon 2 days later. This time, I carried extra batteries for my equipment and a .45 caliber pistol, in addition to my standard bear spray. The forest felt different now. Too quiet. No bird songs, no squirrel chatter, no insects buzzing. Even the wind seemed muted. It was like the whole area was holding its breath. I found the 3rd campsite on my 2nd day back. The solo hiker's gear was spread across a clearing like it had been thrown around by a tornado. His sleeping bag was shredded, his food scattered and half-eaten. But there was something new this time. Bones arranged in patterns around the campsite. Human bones. They were laid out to spell words. "Hungry" in letters 10 feet tall on one side of the clearing, and "Join us" on the other side. The bones were old, yellowed with age, but they'd been arranged recently. The ground underneath was still compressed. I took pictures of everything, but when I checked my camera, half the photos showed nothing but black static. My GPS was spinning wildly, claiming I was simultaneously in Alaska, Canada, and the middle of the Pacific Ocean. That night, I made camp in a defensible position with my back to a cliff face. I kept my fire burning bright and my pistol within reach. Around midnight, I heard something moving in the forest. It started as a rustling in the bushes, then became the sound of heavy footsteps circling my position. Whatever was out there was big, and it was staying just outside my firelight. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam across the tree line. For just a moment, I saw it. 9 feet tall, impossibly thin but muscular, with pale skin that looked like old parchment. Its face was stretched out like a skull, with black holes where the eyes should be and a mouth full of pointed teeth. It was holding something in its hands, something that looked horribly like a human torso. I blinked, and it was gone. The creature didn't attack that night, but it didn't leave either. It spent hours circling my camp, always staying just outside the firelight. Around 3 a.m., it started making sounds, human voices, calling for help. "Help me, please, somebody help me." It was a man's voice, desperate and terrified. Then a different voice. "Dad, Dad, where are you? I can't find the trail." The voices were coming from different directions, like multiple people were lost in the woods around my camp. Every instinct told me to help, to grab my flashlight and go looking for survivors. But I knew it was a trap. The creature was using the voices of the missing hikers, somehow mimicking their exact speech patterns. It knew their names, their relationships, their fears. It was trying to lure me away from my fire and into the darkness where it could hunt me. "Jake?" The voice came from directly behind me. "Jake, is that you? Thank God, we thought we were going to die out here." I spun around, pistol drawn, but there was nothing there except the cliff face I'd been leaning against. "We're over here, Jake. Follow my voice." The voice was coming from above me now, somewhere up on the cliff. Impossible, unless the creature could climb straight up a vertical rock face. I spent the rest of the night sitting by my fire, listening to the voices of dead people calling my name. By dawn, I was exhausted and terrified, but I was alive. In the morning, I found that the creature had left me presents. Personal items from the missing hikers were arranged in a neat line just outside where my firelight had reached. Wedding rings, wallets, family photos, a child's toy from someone's backpack. It was showing me trophies, proof that it had killed all 9 people. One of the items was a journal written by David Chen, the solo hiker. The last entry was dated 3 days before he was reported missing. Asterisk, something has been following me for 2 days. I catch glimpses of it in my peripheral vision, but when I turn to look, there's nothing there. It's huge, bigger than any bear I've ever seen. The weird thing is, it seems intelligent, like it's studying me, learning my routines. Last night, it started making sounds like my ex-wife's voice, calling my name. How could it know her voice? How could it know my name? I think I'm losing my mind out here. If someone finds this journal and I'm missing, tell my family I love them. And whatever you do, don't come looking for me. Asterisk, I tried to hike out that morning, but the creature had destroyed all the trail markers. Every direction I went led me back to the same clearing where it had arranged the bone messages. I was trapped in its territory, and it was playing with me. My equipment was failing systematically. The GPS showed impossible readings, the compass spun randomly, and my satellite radio produced nothing but static. Somehow, the creature was interfering with my electronics whenever it was nearby. I found an old hunting cabin on my third day of being trapped and decided to make my stand there. It had 4 walls, 1 door, and windows I could board up. If the creature wanted me, it would have to come through a choke point where I could see it coming. That night, it brought me more gifts. It had found my personal gear, items from my ranger station 40 miles away. My spare uniform, my high school graduation photo, a birthday card from my sister. The creature had somehow gotten into my private quarters and stolen pieces of my life. It was showing me that nowhere was safe. It could go anywhere, take anything, hunt anyone. Around midnight, it started wearing their faces. I saw David Chen walk past my window, his throat torn open but still moving. Then, the 3 guys from Montana appeared, standing in my doorway with their limbs bent at impossible angles. The father and son from Colorado pressed their faces against my windows, their eyes replaced with black holes. The creature was puppeting their bodies, using them like grotesque marionettes to terrorize me. But when I blinked or looked directly at them, they vanished. By the 4th night, I was hallucinating from exhaustion and fear. I kept seeing movement in my peripheral vision, hearing voices calling my name, feeling cold breath on the back of my neck when nothing was there. That's when I made a desperate decision. I couldn't fight this thing with conventional weapons, but I could signal for help. I gathered every piece of flammable material I could find and started a forest fire. It was incredibly dangerous. The fire could spread out of control and burn thousands of acres. I could be charged with arson and lose my job. But I was going to die anyway if I stayed trapped in Devil's Canyon. I lit the fire just after sunset and watched it spread through the dry undergrowth. Within an hour, smoke was billowing high enough to be seen for miles. If there were any aircraft in the area, they'd spot it and come investigating. The creature didn't like the fire. I could hear it moving through the forest, breaking trees in its frustration. It let out a sound that was part human scream, part animal howl, a noise that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. Just before midnight, I heard the blessed sound of helicopter rotors. The pilot was Gary Williams, a 20-year veteran who'd flown rescue missions all over Alaska. He landed in a small clearing about 100 yards from my position, and I ran toward the helicopter like my life depended on it. Jesus Christ, Morrison, what the hell happened out here? We need to leave, now. I was climbing into the passenger seat when Gary's face went white. He was looking past me, back toward the tree line. What is that thing? I turned and saw the creature standing at the edge of the clearing. In the helicopter's spotlight, it looked even more horrible than I remembered. 9 feet of pale, emaciated flesh stretched over 2 long bones. Its head was elongated like a skull, with black eye sockets and a mouth full of pointed teeth. It was standing upright like a man, but everything about it was wrong. Go, go. Gary didn't need to be told twice. We lifted off just as the creature broke into a run, and it was fast, faster than anything that size should be able to move. It kept pace with the helicopter for almost 3 miles, running below us through the forest like some nightmare version of a marathon runner. Finally, it stopped at the edge of Devil's Canyon and watched us disappear into the night. Even from a mile away, I could feel its hunger. The Park Service classified Devil's Canyon as indefinitely closed within a week. Officially, they blamed the missing hikers on unusually aggressive bear behavior and unstable weather conditions. They installed motion sensor cameras throughout the dock area and banned all public access. I was transferred to Glacier National Park in Montana and required to sign a non-disclosure agreement about what I'd encountered. The official report listed my experience as stress-related hallucinations brought on by extended isolation and sleep deprivation. But Gary Williams backed up my story. He'd seen the creature with his own eyes, and they couldn't explain that away. 2 other rangers who tried to investigate Devil's Canyon after I left have since disappeared without a trace. The motion cameras have captured footage, but the Park Service won't release it to the public. I've heard rumors from contacts inside the agency that the creature has been filmed multiple times, always at night, always hunting. Local tribes have offered to perform cleansing rituals in Devil's Canyon, but the Park Service won't allow it. They're treating this like a wildlife management problem instead of what it really is, an ancient evil that gets stronger every time it feeds. I know the creature is still out there. Every few months, I get reports from other rangers about missing hikers in remote areas of Alaska. Always experienced outdoorsmen, always in groups, always without a trace. It's growing larger and hungrier, and sooner or later, someone's going to let their guard down. When that happens, more people are going to die, and there won't be anything left of them except bones arranged in messages that spell out their final moments of terror. If you're planning to hike in Alaska's remote areas, especially anywhere near Devil's Canyon, please listen to me. Don't go alone. Don't camp in the same spot twice. And if you hear voices calling your name in the middle of the night, don't answer them. The hungry ghost is always listening, and it's always learning new ways to hunt. My name is Tom Wheeler, and I've been an auto mechanic for 8 years here in Tok, Alaska. I work at Miller's Garage, fixing everything from snowmobiles to 18-wheelers. When you live this far north, you learn that broken equipment can mean life or death. I've pulled people out of -40 weather because their truck died on the highway. I've fixed generators during power outages that kept entire families warm. In Alaska, being a good mechanic isn't just a job, it's how you keep your neighbors alive. I thought I understood what real danger looked like. I was wrong. Every fall, my buddy Danny and I would take 5 days off work to hunt caribou. We'd been doing it since high school, 10 years running. Danny worked with me at the garage, best brake guy I ever knew. The ritual was always the same: load up our ATVs, drive about 100 miles northeast of town, and set up camp near the Tanana River where the caribou crossed during migration. This past October, everything started normal. We left town on a Tuesday morning with perfect weather, crisp air, clear skies, and fresh snow that would make tracking easy. Our camp was set up by noon near a bend in the river where we'd seen herds before. The first 2 days went exactly as planned. We saw plenty of sign, heard caribou moving through the willows at night, and filled our coolers with char from the river. On Thursday morning, I woke up to the sound of chainsaws running in the distance. At first, I thought I was dreaming, but Danny heard them too. We sat in our tent, listening to the mechanical whine echoing through the valley. It didn't make sense. There were no logging operations out here, no timber sales, no road access for heavy equipment, just wilderness. Maybe it's Forest Service? Danny suggested, but even he sounded doubtful. We decided to investigate. The sound was coming from about 2 miles upstream, past a ridge we'd never bothered exploring. We took our rifles and followed, an old game trail through thick spruce forest. The chainsaw noise got louder as we climbed. What we found changed everything. Hidden in a clearing behind the ridge was a camp that looked military. Olive-drab canvas tents, camouflage netting, and expensive equipment I recognized from Army surplus catalogs. 3 men in hunting gear were working around a large table made from sawhorses and plywood. The chainsaws had gone quiet, but I could smell gasoline and something else, something metallic and wrong. Danny grabbed my arm and pointed. On the table was a human body. The 3 men were cutting it apart like they were field dressing a moose. They worked with practiced efficiency, using bone saws and butcher knives. Parts went into different containers, some into coolers, others into black garbage bags. They talked casually while they worked, like this was just another day at the office. I felt sick. Danny was shaking beside me. We both wanted to run, but something kept us frozen behind the trees. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was the horrible need to understand what we were seeing. Then I recognized one of the men. Frank Morrison. He'd brought his pickup to our shop just last month for a transmission flush. Big guy, maybe 50, with gray hair and thick hands. He'd been polite enough, paid in cash, even left a decent tip. Now he was cutting up a human being like it was a side of beef. "We need to check the traps tomorrow," Frank was saying. "Hunting season's been good this year." One of the other men laughed. That hiker last week was perfect. No family looking for him, no GPS tracker. Just wandering around alone like a gift. "The beauty of Alaska," Frank replied. "So many people come up here and just disappear. Who's gonna look?" They were talking about hunting people, actually hunting human beings for sport and food. The containers around their camp weren't just for game meat, they were for people. Danny and I started backing away slowly. We had to get out of there, had to get back to town and call the state troopers. But then Frank looked up and stared straight at us through the trees. "Well, hello there," he called out. "Tom Wheeler from Miller's Garage. Fancy meeting you out here." The other two men stopped working and reached for rifles leaning against a nearby tree. Frank wiped his bloody hands on a towel and smiled. "You boys shouldn't have come poking around," he said. "Now we've got a problem." We ran. I'd never been so scared in my life. Danny and I crashed through the forest, branches tearing at our clothes, trying to get back to our camp. But these men knew the terrain better than we did. They spread out and cut off our escape route. I could hear them moving through the woods, calling out to each other like they were tracking wounded animals. Danny got caught first. I heard him scream from somewhere behind me, then the sound of him fighting. The screaming went on for a long time. Hours, maybe. I hid in an old beaver dam, chest deep in freezing water, while they did things to my best friend that I can't forget. When the screaming finally stopped, Frank called out my name. "Tom, I know you're out there, buddy. Might as well come on out. I know where you work, where you live. This ends one way or another." That's when I realized how screwed I really was. Even if I escaped, Frank knew who I was. He'd been to my shop. He could find me anytime he wanted. I stayed hidden in that beaver dam for 2 days. The men searched for me with dogs and followed grid patterns like a professional search team. This wasn't their first time hunting people. They had system, equipment, experience. While they searched, I listened to them talk about their plans. They'd been doing this for years, targeting hikers, hunters, anyone who came into the wilderness alone. They had a list of missing persons from across Alaska and Western Canada, people they'd killed and eaten. The authorities thought these folks had just gotten lost or died in accidents. No one suspected murder, and they were planning to expand their operation. Frank talked about visiting my garage to finish the job if they couldn't find me in the woods. They knew my address, my girlfriend Sarah's name, my parents' place in Fairbanks. They'd done research, prepared for this possibility. On the 4th night, I made a decision. Instead of hiding, I was going to fight back. I used my mechanical knowledge against them. While they slept, I snuck into their camp and found their generator, a big Honda unit powering their lights and electric tools. I rigged an explosive device using their own gasoline and some electrical components from their equipment. Basic stuff, really. Any mechanic could do it. I also sabotaged their ATVs and cut the wires on their radio equipment. If I was going to take them on, I wanted them stranded and isolated. The explosion went off just after sunrise. It took out 2 of the cannibals immediately and left Frank burned and bleeding. But he was tougher than I expected. Even wounded, he managed to escape into the woods, shouting that he'd hunt down everyone I cared about. I made it back to town and went straight to the state troopers. They found the camp, the remains of multiple victims, and enough evidence to prove everything I'd told them. But Frank Morrison had vanished completely. I had to tell Sarah and my parents that a killer was coming for them because of me. We all went into hiding while police searched for Frank. For 3 weeks, we thought maybe he'd died from his injuries in the wilderness. Then he broke into my parents' house in Fairbanks and killed them both. Dad was 72, Mom was 68. They'd never hurt anybody in their lives. Frank left a note on their kitchen table. "Tom's next. But first, everyone he loves dies." Sarah and I moved to Anchorage, changed our names, tried to start over. But Frank tracked us down within a month. I came home from work and found Sarah's body in our apartment. Another note, same handwriting. "You can't hide forever." I realized then that Frank would never stop. The police couldn't protect everyone I cared about. He was too smart, too experienced, and he had nothing left to lose. There was only one way this could end. I drove back to the wilderness, where it all started. Where Danny died, I knew Frank would follow me there. It was personal now, between him and me. We hunted each other for 3 days in those same woods. I used every trick I'd learned as a mechanic. Improvised weapons, booby traps, using the terrain like a machine I could fix and modify. Frank was wounded, but he was also crazy with rage and hunger for revenge. I finally cornered him near the river, where Danny and I used to fish. We fought with knives and broken tools, 2 men who'd both lost everything. I managed to kill him, but not before he put a knife through my lung and opened an artery in my leg. With my last strength, I activated the GPS beacon on my emergency radio and sent the coordinates to the state troopers. They found both our bodies 3 days later, along with all the evidence linking Frank to dozens of missing persons across Alaska and Canada. My death helped solve cases that had been cold for years. The investigation exposed an entire network of cannibals operating across the wilderness. Several arrests were made in different states. Families finally got answers about their missing loved ones. But Danny was still dead. Sarah was still dead. My parents were still dead. And now I was dead too. Frank got his revenge, even though I stopped him. Sometimes doing the right thing costs you everything. Sometimes the monster wins, even when you kill it. If you're reading this, if you're planning to hunt or hike alone in remote areas, remember my story. There are worse things than bears and wolves in the wilderness. There are people who hunt other people. People who see you not as a fellow human being, but as meat. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, get out. Don't investigate strange sounds or camps. Don't try to be a hero. And always tell someone exactly where you're going and when you'll be back. Because once you become their target, you might never make it home at all. My name is Rebecca Martinez, and I've been managing the Arctic Foods grocery store in Nome, Alaska for 8 years. When you run the only full-service grocery store in a town of 3,500 people, you become more than just a manager. You become a lifeline. I've handled everything from supply chain disasters during blizzards to keeping shelves stocked when cargo planes couldn't land for weeks. I know every regular customer by name, their usual orders, and their family situations. But what happened in April 2024 changed everything I thought I knew about keeping people safe and fed in this remote corner of Alaska. Sometimes the real danger isn't the cold or isolation, it's what's been sleeping underneath our feet. April in Nome usually means the ground is still frozen solid. The permafrost here goes down hundreds of feet and has kept our town stable since the gold rush days. My store sits on Front Street, just 2 blocks from the old cemetery on the hill. That cemetery has been there since 1899, built on permafrost that was supposed to keep everything frozen forever. But 2024 was different. By the first week of April, we hit 55 degrees, the warmest on record. I noticed it first in my store's basement, where I keep extra inventory. The concrete floor was sweating, and I could hear dripping sounds in the walls. My freezer unit started working overtime to maintain temperature, driving up our electricity bill by 40%. The real problem started with the cemetery. From my office window, I could see cracks forming in the ground between the old headstones. At first, I thought it was just frost heave, normal settling that happens every spring. But the cracks kept getting bigger, and by the end of the first week, you could see them from the street. That's when the smell started. It wasn't the normal spring smell of thawing earth and last year's grass. This was sweet and rotten, like flowers left too long in standing water. Customers started complaining as soon as they walked into my store. Mrs. Patterson, who's shopped here for 30 years, asked if something had gone bad in our meat department. I checked everything twice. All our refrigeration was working perfectly, and nothing was expired. But the smell kept getting stronger. By the second week of April, something was seriously wrong with my customers. People I'd known for years were coming in looking pale and shaky. They weren't buying their usual groceries. Instead, they were cleaning out our medicine aisle. Pain relievers, stomach medicine, anything for nausea. Tom Chen, who runs the auto repair shop, came in on a Tuesday morning buying 5 bottles of antacid. His hands were shaking so bad he could barely hold his wallet. When I asked if he was okay, he just mumbled something about feeling sick and left without his change. Mrs. Patterson was worse. She'd always been one of my healthiest customers, always buying fresh vegetables and walking to the store every day. But when she came in that Wednesday, I barely recognized her. Her skin was gray, and there were dark lines under her fingernails. She kept scratching at her arms while she shopped, leaving red marks on her skin. "Rebecca, do you have anything stronger for pain?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "The regular stuff isn't helping anymore." I suggested she see Dr. Kim at the clinic, but she just shook her head. "Half the town's there already. She can't see anyone for days." That's when I noticed the blood on my freezer doors. Fresh red handprints, like someone had pressed their palms against the glass while their hands were bleeding. I cleaned them off, but the next morning, there were more. By the third week, I was seeing symptoms I'd never imagined. Sarah Williams, a teacher at the elementary school, came in with chunks of her hair missing. Just empty patches on her scalp, like someone had pulled it out in handfuls. She bought every bottle of hair vitamins I had, her eyes wild and desperate. The Kowalski family from Bering Street all came in together, and I had to look twice to make sure it was really them. Their skin had a grayish tint, and their teeth were stained black. Their youngest daughter, Emma, who was only 7, had bloodshot eyes that made her look like she hadn't slept in weeks. But the worst part was the way they moved. Slow and jerky, like their bodies weren't working right, and the smell, that sweet, rotting smell, was coming from them now, not just the cemetery. Dr. Kim finally came to my store herself on a Thursday afternoon. She looked exhausted, with dark circles under her eyes and coffee stains on her white coat. "Rebecca, I need to ask you something," she said, pulling me aside. "Have you noticed anything unusual about the people who shop here? Specifically, where they live?" I thought about it. Mrs. Patterson lived on Cemetery Road, closest to the hill. The Kowalskis were on Bering Street, just 1 block over. Tom Chen's house backed up to the cemetery property. They're all from the north side of town, I realized. Near the cemetery. Dr. Kim nodded grimly. The people closest to the cemetery are getting sick first. And Rebecca, whatever this is, it's spreading. That night, I stayed late to check our inventory and noticed something that made my blood run cold. The smell in my store was getting stronger, and it was coming from the north wall, the wall facing the cemetery. I followed it to the basement and found water seeping through the foundation. Not clean groundwater, but something dark and oily that reeked of decay. I drove up to the cemetery to see for myself. What I found there will haunt me forever. The ground around the oldest graves had split open, and I could see coffin edges sticking out of the earth. Some were from the 1800s, made of rotting wood that was falling apart, and the smell was so strong it made me gag. But that wasn't the worst part. As I stood there in Graven and Leifton, the twilight, I saw movement near the broken graves. People, walking slowly between the headstones. At first I thought they were visiting family plots, but then I recognized them. Mrs. Patterson was there, and Tom Chen, and the entire Kowalski family. They weren't visiting graves. They were just standing there, swaying slightly, like they were listening to something I couldn't hear. Their clothes were stained with something dark, and when Mrs. Patterson turned toward me, her eyes were completely black. That's when I ran. I spent that whole night in my store office, researching everything I could find about Nome's history. The internet in town is unreliable, but our library has digitized records going back to the founding. What I found made everything click into place. The original cemetery wasn't just for regular townspeople who died of natural causes. In 1898, there had been an outbreak during the gold rush. Prospectors and their families had died of something the old records called the wasting disease. Symptoms included gray skin, black teeth, hair loss, and aggressive behavior before death. The bodies had been buried quickly in the permafrost to prevent spread. But here's the thing about permafrost. It doesn't just freeze things, it preserves them. Every bacteria, every virus, every pathogen gets locked in suspended animation. And when that permafrost melts for the first time in over a century, everything comes back to life. I tried calling the state health department, but they kept transferring me around. Finally, I got through to someone who said it sounded like food poisoning and hung up on me. The CDC was even worse. They suggested I call the local doctor and stop wasting their time. Nobody was taking this seriously. But I could see what was happening from my store window. More people were getting sick every day, and the ones who were already sick were getting worse. By the 4th week, my store had become a nightmare. Infected customers would wander the aisles without buying anything, just standing in corners and staring at nothing. Their skin was starting to rot in places, but they didn't seem to notice or care. They couldn't speak properly anymore, just grunts and moans that barely sounded human. Mr. Rodriguez, who used to run the gas station, attacked his own son right in my produce section. I watched through the security camera as he grabbed a shovel from our garden supplies and chased the boy down aisle 3. His fingers left rotting marks on the handle, and when I tried to intervene, he turned on me with those completely black eyes. That's when I realized these people weren't really people anymore. Whatever bacteria had been sleeping in that permafrost wasn't just making them sick, it was eating their brains while keeping their bodies moving. They were like walking corpses, driven by infection instead of conscious thought. I called the few people in town who still seemed healthy, mostly folks who lived on the south side, farthest from the cemetery. We barricaded ourselves in my store with all the medical supplies and canned food we could gather. There were 12 of us total, including Dr. Kim and my assistant manager Jake. Outside, we could see the infected wandering the streets. They moved in groups now, hunting for healthy people. When they found someone uninfected, they would attack without warning, spreading their contaminated blood and saliva. We watched them break into houses and drag screaming families into the streets. In my office, I found an old ham radio that the previous store manager had left behind. I'd never used it before, but desperate times called for desperate measures. After hours of trying different frequencies, I finally reached Dr. Elena Martinez at the University of Alaska in Fairbanks. "This is going to sound crazy," I told her, "but I think we have an outbreak of 19th century bacteria that's been preserved in permafrost." Most people would have hung up, but Dr. Martinez was a microbiologist who specialized in ancient pathogens. She believed me immediately. "I've been warning about this for years," she said. "Climate change is melting permafrost all across Alaska, and we have no idea what's been sleeping down there. I'm flying out tonight with antibiotics and research equipment." While we waited for help, the situation outside got worse. The infected had broken into the school, the clinic, and most of the houses on the north side of town. We could hear them moving around at night, scratching at windows and doors. Sometimes, they would pound on our store's metal shutters for hours. Dr. Martinez arrived by helicopter the next morning, just as a group of infected were trying to break down our front door. She confirmed what I'd suspected. The bacteria was a strain that had never been cataloged by modern science, and it was specifically adapted to feed on human neural tissue while keeping the body alive. But she also brought hope. "Extreme cold can kill this bacteria," she explained. "It survives freezing, but not rapid temperature changes. If we can lower their body temperature fast enough, we might be able to stop the infection before it causes permanent brain damage." Using my store's walk-in freezers, we started what Dr. Brain Damage to Streif, we know my X-Stop 2 and 46 damage 40. Martinez called hypothermia therapy. It was dangerous. We had to bring infected people's body temperatures down to nearly fatal levels to kill the bacteria. Some of them didn't survive the treatment, but it was better than letting them become mindless killers. The process was horrible. We had to capture infected townspeople and hold them down while their body temperature dropped. They would thrash and moan, their black eyes rolling back in their heads. But after 20 minutes in the freezer, the lucky ones would go limp. When we brought them back to normal temperature, they were weak but human again. I helped organize teams to capture infected residents before the brain damage became permanent. We saved Mrs. Patterson, though she lost 3 fingers to frostbite. The Kowalski parents survived, but little Emma was too far gone. The bacteria had eaten too much of her brain tissue. We worked for 3 straight days, capturing and treating everyone we could. Dr. Martinez documented everything and collected samples for her research. By the end, we'd saved about 60% of the infected population. The rest were either dead or too damaged to recover. The hardest part was burning down the cemetery. We had to destroy every exposed grave and treat the soil with industrial disinfectant to make sure no more bacteria could spread. Watching over a century of our town's history go up in flames was heartbreaking, but necessary. State authorities finally showed up a week later. After Dr. Martinez's preliminary report reached the CDC, they quarantined the town and brought in specialists to make sure the outbreak was contained. They also brought grief counselors and emergency aid, though it felt too little, too late. I'm still the manager of Arctic Foods, though the town is different now. We lost 43 people to the bacteria and another dozen to the treatment. Many families moved away, unable to cope with the memories. But the survivors grew closer, bonded by shared trauma and the knowledge that we'd saved each other. Dr. Martinez stayed in Nome to continue her research. We fell in love during those terrible weeks, finding comfort in each other while surrounded by death and horror. We married the following spring and now work together monitoring permafrost thaw sites across Alaska. My store has become more than just a grocery store. It's a community center and early warning system. I know the signs now, and I've trained other store managers in remote Alaska towns to watch for similar outbreaks. We've established emergency protocols and communication networks that didn't exist before. The state has created a permafrost disease monitoring program based on what we learned in Nome. Dr. Martinez developed vaccines using samples from our outbreak, and now every Alaska resident can get immunized against known ancient pathogens. We built a memorial for the people we lost, and a research station to study permafrost diseases. Our story is taught in medical schools as an example of community response to unknown pathogens. Other Alaska towns now have emergency protocols based on our experience. I'm proud that we turned a horrific situation into something that protects other communities. Climate change is going to keep melting permafrost, and who knows what else is sleeping down there. But now we're ready for it. Every morning when I unlock my store, I look toward the hill where the cemetery used to be. It's just bare ground now, carefully monitored and regularly tested. The smell is gone, and my customers are healthy. But I'll never forget those weeks when the dead came back to claim the living, or how a small-town grocery store became the last stand against an ancient evil. Sometimes, the most important battles are fought in the most ordinary places. And sometimes, the person who saves everyone is just someone who pays attention to their customers and refuses to give up when things get impossible. My name is Linda Morrison, and I've been a librarian for 12 years. I started right after college at a small branch in Denver, then moved to bigger city libraries in Chicago and Seattle. I love organizing information systems and running reading programs for kids. Libraries are supposed to be safe, quiet places where the worst thing that happens is someone talks too loud or returns a book late. But what happened during my 3-month contract in Barrow, Alaska, changed everything I thought I knew about my job and the places where I work. In October 2023, I got a call from the North Slope Borough Library System. They needed someone to reorganize their main library in Barrow and set up a winter literacy program for local children. The pay was incredible, 3 times my normal salary, because not many people want to work in the northernmost town in America during polar night season. Barrow sits right on the Arctic Ocean with about 4,000 residents, mostly Inupiat families who've lived there for generations. The town gets 65 days of complete darkness every winter, from late November to late January. No sun at all, just darkness, snow, and temperatures that hit -40 degrees. I arrived on October 28th, just as the sun was setting for the last time until January. The library was a sturdy 2-story building made of concrete and steel, built to handle Arctic weather. Big windows faced north toward the ocean, and on clear nights you could see the aurora borealis dancing across the sky in green and blue waves. The building had a main floor with circulation desk, reading areas, and computer stations. Upstairs was my office, meeting rooms, and storage. The basement held mechanical systems, archives, and overflow storage. Everything was connected by a central heating system that kept the building at a comfortable 72 degrees while outside temperatures dropped to deadly levels. My job was straightforward: reorganize their collection using the Dewey Decimal System, update their computer catalog, and run evening reading programs for kids whose parents worked during the day. The head librarian, Mrs. Kakutak, was retiring after 30 years and wanted everything perfect for her replacement. The first 2 weeks went great. I worked normal hours, got to know the regular patrons, and started planning the children's program. The library felt cozy and warm during those long, dark hours. Kids would come in after school and I'd read them stories while their parents finished work. Everything seemed normal. By mid-November, I started noticing things. Every morning when I opened the library, there were animal tracks in the snow around the building. Big tracks, polar bear tracks. Mrs. Kakudak said this was normal. Bears come into town sometimes, she explained. Climate change pushed them off the sea ice. They're looking for food. She gave me a canister of bear spray and a laminated card with safety rules. Stay calm, make yourself big, back away slowly, never run. But these tracks were different. They circled the entire building like the bear was checking every entrance. I found scratch marks on the window frames where something had tested the glass. Deep claw marks that went through the metal trim. The tracks appeared every single morning in fresh snow, which meant whatever was making them came back every night. Always the same pattern, as around the building, testing doors and windows, then disappearing toward the ocean. During my evening hours alone in the library, I started hearing sounds on the roof, scratching, scraping, like something heavy was walking around up there. At first I thought it was wind or the building settling in the cold. Old buildings make weird noises, especially in extreme weather. But the sounds had a pattern. They started around 7 p.m., just after I locked the doors for evening programs. Scratch, scrape, pause. Scratch, scrape, pause. Like something was testing the Monty roof, looking for weak spots. One evening in late November, I was shelving books in the children's section when I heard breathing outside the north windows. Not wind, breathing. Deep, slow, like something huge was standing right outside in the darkness. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it through the glass. 2 yellow eyes reflected back at me, maybe 8 feet off the ground. Then they were gone. I called animal control the next morning. Officer Jimmy Aiken said one bear hanging around wasn't an emergency. "They're curious," he said. "Keep your doors locked, use the spray if you see one, and it'll move on." But this bear wasn't moving on, it was learning. December brought deeper cold and longer darkness. The bear's visits became more aggressive. Instead of just circling the building, it started testing doors and windows with its massive paws. I could hear the metal frames creaking under pressure. The scratch marks on the windows got deeper. The bear was marking territory, claiming the library as part of its hunting ground. Mrs. Kakutak started staying late some evenings, but even she looked nervous when we heard the roof sounds. "Maybe you should carry this," she said one night, pulling a shotgun from her desk drawer. "My husband taught me to shoot when I was 12. Bears respect loud noises." I'd never held a gun before, but I took the safety course and kept it behind the circulation desk. Just having it there made me feel better, even though I hoped I'd never need it. The bear's behavior got stranger. It started showing up at exactly 7:15 every evening, like it had memorized my schedule. I could see its massive shape through the frosted windows, standing upright on its hind legs, watching me work. It was huge, bigger than any polar bear I'd seen in documentaries, maybe 10 feet tall when it stood up, with a head the size of a trash can. Its fur was yellowish-white, stained with dirt and what looked like old blood. I started documenting everything. Times, locations, behaviors. The bear was systematically checking every entrance to the building. Emergency exits, loading dock, even the basement windows. It was mapping the building's weaknesses. During children's reading time, I had to close the curtains because the bear would press its face against the glass, scaring the kids. Parents started picking up their children earlier. By mid-December, I was alone in the building most evenings. The bear seemed to know this. December 18th was the night everything changed. I was working late, updating the computer catalog and preparing for the next day's reading program. The heat was running constantly against the -30 temperature outside. Around 8 p.m., I heard the usual scratching on the roof. But this time it was different. Louder. More focused. The bear wasn't just walking around anymore. It was trying to get in. The scratching moved to the back of the building, near the loading dock. I heard metal groaning, then a loud crack. The back door alarm started screaming. I grabbed the shotgun and called 911, but the dispatcher said officers were dealing with another bear emergency across town. "Lock yourself in a safe room and wait," she said. "We'll get there as soon as possible." I barricaded myself in the children's section, pushing shelves against the door and windows. The back door alarm stopped, which meant the bear had gotten through. Heavy footsteps echoed through the building, not human footsteps. Something massive moving through the library, knocking over chairs and displays. The bear was inside, and it was searching for something, or someone. The footsteps got closer. I could hear the bear destroying furniture, tearing apart reading areas like it was looking for food. But there was no food in the library. Just me. Through the barricaded door, I heard sniffing. Deep, investigative breathing. The bear had found my scent trail and was following it to the children's section. The door handle rattled, then the entire door shook as something massive pushed against it. The shelves I'd used as barricades started sliding across the floor. I pumped the shotgun like Mrs. Kakutak had taught me and aimed at the door. The bear hit it again, harder this time. Wood splintered. One more hit and it would be through. The bear's massive head appeared in the doorway, yellow eyes fixed on me. I fired. The blast was deafening in the small room. I hit the bear in the shoulder, but it didn't go down. Instead, it roared, high a sound like nothing I'd ever heard, and became furious. Blood streamed down its front leg, but the wound just made it more aggressive. It tore through the remaining barricade like it was made of paper and came straight for me. I dove through the window behind me, cutting my arms on the broken glass, but getting outside into the snow. The bear was right behind me, too big to fit through the window, but trying anyway. I ran toward Main Street, but the bear was faster. Even wounded, it moved through snow like I moved through water. I could hear it gaining on me with every step. Mrs. Patterson's house was 3 blocks away. I pounded on her door, screaming for help while the bear rounded the corner behind me. She let me in just as massive paws hit her front door. "It followed you here," she whispered, looking through her window at the bear circling her house. "That's not normal behavior. Bears don't hunt humans like this." We called animal control again, but Officer Aiken said the situation was getting worse all over town. "We've got 3 different bears breaking into houses tonight," he said. "Something's got them crazy." But this wasn't just any bear. This one knew me. It had studied my routine, learned my habits, and planned its attack. Through Mrs. Patterson's window, I watched it test her doors and windows the same way it had tested the library. It was hunting me, specifically. When animal control finally arrived 2 hours later, the bear was gone. But the damage at the library was incredible. The entire main floor looked like a tornado had hit it. Shelves destroyed, computers smashed, books scattered everywhere. But the bear hadn't been looking for food. Officer Aiken found something else in the basement. "Linda, you need to see this," he called from downstairs. In the basement storage room, behind boxes of old books, the bear had made a den. Blankets and clothing were arranged in a nest, along with personal items that didn't belong to the library. Wallets, jewelry, car keys. And bones. Human bones, still with bits of flesh attached. "How long has this bear been living here?" I asked. "Months, maybe longer," Officer Aiken said, examining claw marks on the basement walls. "It's been using the basement as a base and hunting people all over town. The missing persons reports we've been getting, this explains everything. The bear had been stalking residents, learning their routines, and picking off people who were alone. The library basement gave it shelter and a perfect hunting ground. It knew exactly when I worked late by myself. We thought the nightmare was over when they shot the bear the next morning. It took 6 officers with high-powered rifles to bring it down. The bear weighed over 1,200 pounds and had scars from fights with other bears and probably humans trying to defend themselves. But as we stood around the dead bear, I heard familiar sounds from inside the library, scratching on the roof. "There's another one," Officer Aiken said, raising his rifle. This bear was even bigger than the first. A female, probably the mate of the one we'd killed. She'd been watching us the whole time, and now she was furious. She burst through the front doors like they were made of cardboard. I ran, but she caught me in the parking lot, her claws tearing through my coat and into my leg. The pain was incredible, like being hit by a truck with knives attached. Other officers opened fire, but the female bear was smarter than her mate. She used buildings for cover and attacked from different angles. It took 6 hours and backup from state wildlife officials to finally corner and kill her. They found her den too, in an abandoned house near the ocean. More human remains, more personal belongings. The 2 bears had been working together, hunting humans as their primary food source all winter. I finished my contract in January, when the sun finally returned to Barrow. But I was never the same. The 3-inch scars on my leg remind me every day that libraries aren't always safe places. I moved back to Colorado and took a job at a small branch library in a suburban neighborhood. No isolated evening hours, no working alone, and definitely no jobs in places where large predators live. I still wake up sometimes, thinking I hear scratching on the roof. My apartment is on the 3rd floor of a building in downtown Denver, but that doesn't stop the nightmares. The official report said the bears were driven to unusual behavior by climate change and food scarcity. But I know the truth. Those bears weren't just hungry. They were smart, organized, and they had developed a taste for human prey. Mrs. Kakatak never went back to the library. The building was demolished 6 months later and replaced with a smaller, more secure facility. The new librarian works normal daytime hours only, and security cameras monitor every entrance. I still love being a librarian. Books and knowledge and helping people learn, that's my calling. But I'll never work in isolation again, and I'll never forget that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones smart enough to study their prey. If you're ever offered a job in a remote location with higher pay because not many people want to work there, ask yourself why. Sometimes there's a very good reason. People stay away. My name is Maria Santos, and I've been a school janitor for 18 years. I work at Kotzebue Elementary in Alaska, where I keep the halls clean and the kids safe. I've mopped thousands of floors, fixed broken pipes in freezing weather, and even helped lost children find their way home. I thought I'd seen everything. But what happened in August 2024 during our town's fishing trip changed everything I thought I knew about survival and what people will do to live. I should have stayed home that week. Every summer, our small town of Kotzebue organizes a fishing trip. It's a tradition that goes back generations. 20 people from town charter a boat and head out to the Chukchi Sea to catch fish for winter. Families depend on this trip. With food prices so high in Alaska, we need that fish to survive the cold months ahead. I signed up because my family needed the food. My husband had been laid off from the mine, and my janitor salary wasn't enough to buy fish from the store. The trip cost $300 per person, but we'd bring back enough fish to feed our family for months. The boat was called the Arctic Dawn, a 65-foot fishing vessel that had been making these trips for over 10 years. Captain Peterson knew these waters better than anyone. He'd grown up in Kotzebue and had been fishing since he was 12. The crew included some local fishermen I'd known for years. Was Kotzebue. Good people who worked hard and took care of their families. On August 15th, we loaded our gear and set sail. The weather was perfect, clear skies and calm seas. Everyone was excited. Mrs. Johnson brought homemade cookies for the trip. The teenage kids, Amy and Jake, were on their first adult fishing expedition. Their parents wanted them to learn the old ways. The first 3 days went exactly as planned. We caught more salmon and Arctic char than we'd hoped for. The fish were running strong, and Captain Peterson knew all the best spots. The ice chests were filling, but up fast. Everyone was happy and talking about how this would be the best catch in years. I spent most of my time helping in the galley, preparing meals for everyone. After years of cooking for school events, I knew how to feed a crowd. The work felt familiar and comfortable. This was just like organizing the school's winter festival, but on a boat. On the 4th day, everything changed. I was cleaning up after breakfast when the storm hit. It came out of nowhere. One minute the sea was calm, the next we were getting pounded by 30-foot waves. The wind howled like something alive and angry. Captain Peterson tried to steer us to calmer water, but a massive wave crashed over the deck and flooded the engine room. Salt water got into everything: the engine, the radio, the navigation equipment. Sparks flew from the control panel, and then everything went dead. The mast snapped like a toothpick, and our emergency sail tore to pieces. We were completely powerless, drifting wherever the storm wanted to take us. "Don't panic," Captain Peterson shouted over the wind. "We'll get the engine running again." But I could see the fear in his eyes. He'd been through bad storms before, but nothing like this. The engine room was flooded with 3 feet of salt water. The radio was fried. Our GPS system showed nothing but static. We were 200 miles from shore with no way to call for help. The storm lasted 8 hours. When it finally passed, we took stock of our situation. The engine was completely dead. Salt water had destroyed the electrical systems. Our emergency beacon wasn't working. The satellite phone was water damaged and useless. We had food for 1 week, but Captain Peterson said it could take weeks to repair the engine, if we could repair it at all. The nearest shipping lane was over 100 miles away. Nobody would think to look for us until we were supposed to return. "We'll be fine," Captain Peterson told everyone. "Ships pass through here all the time. Someone will spot us." But I could hear the doubt in his voice. Days passed with no sign of rescue. We rationed our food carefully, but 20 people eat a lot. The fresh fish we'd caught started to spoil in the August heat. We had to throw most of it overboard. By day 10, we were eating 1 small meal per day. People were getting weak and irritable. The elderly passengers, Mrs. Johnson and Mr. Frank, were struggling the most. They couldn't keep much food down, and they were losing weight fast. Captain Peterson kept trying to fix the engine, but it was hopeless. Too many critical parts were damaged. We needed replacement parts that we didn't have. On day 14, our last canned food was gone. We had nothing left except a few crackers and some emergency water tablets. People started talking about eating seaweed or trying to catch fish with improvised hooks. But the fish weren't biting. The storm had scattered them, and our professional fishing gear was designed for use with the boat's power systems. Mrs. Johnson was getting sicker every day. She was diabetic, and the stress was making it worse. Her husband held her hand while she struggled to breathe. "Maria," she whispered to me on day 16, "take care of the children if something happens to me." I promised her I would, but I didn't know how I could keep that promise. We were all dying slowly. On day 18, Mrs. Johnson died in her sleep. Her heart just gave out. Her husband cried for hours while we wrapped her body in canvas. That's when someone said it. I won't say who, because it doesn't matter now. They suggested we could use her body for food. The idea hit everyone like a physical blow. People started shouting, crying, refusing to even think about it. But I looked at Amy and Jake, the teenagers who were getting weaker every day, and I knew we were facing an impossible choice. "We can't," said Jake's mother. "It's not right. It's not human." But Captain Peterson pulled me aside later that night. "Maria, you've worked in food service. You know about preparation? If it comes to that, could you?" I couldn't answer him. The thought made me sick. But those kids were dying. 4 more people died by day 22. The hunger was killing us faster now. Amy could barely stand up. Jake was so weak he couldn't help with any of the boat maintenance. That's when Captain Peterson made the decision that still haunts me. "We have to use the bodies," he announced. "It's the only way any of us survive." Half the group refused. They said they'd rather die than eat human flesh. But I looked at those teenagers and knew I had to do whatever it took to keep them alive. I had experience preparing food for large groups. I knew about sanitation and safe preparation. If we were going to do this horrible thing, it had to be done right. Using Mrs. Johnson's body was the hardest thing I've ever done. I treated her with as much respect as possible, saying prayers while I worked. The meat was tough and had a strange taste, but it gave us the protein we desperately needed. Some people couldn't bring themselves to eat it. They kept starving themselves, choosing death over survival. But I forced myself to eat so I could stay strong enough to help the others. The meat from one person lasted about a week for the remaining survivors. It bought us time, but we were still drifting helplessly in the vast Arctic Ocean. On day 35, we spotted a Coast Guard helicopter in the distance. Everyone went crazy, waving shirts and using mirrors to reflect sunlight. But the helicopter was too far away. They didn't see us. Watching that helicopter disappear was worse than the hunger. For a few minutes, we thought we were saved. Then we were alone again. 2 more people died that week. The psychological strain was as bad as the physical hunger. People stopped talking to each other. Some just stared at the horizon all day, waiting to die. I kept taking on more of the terrible burden of preparing the bodies. I didn't want anyone else to carry that weight. At night, I'd pray for forgiveness and for strength to keep going. The teenagers were still alive, but barely. Amy was so weak she couldn't walk. Jake spent most of his time sleeping. Their parents begged me to keep giving them food, even when it meant others got less. I made that choice every day. I fed the young ones first, because they had the best chance of surviving if rescue came. On day 42, Jake spotted something on the horizon. "Ship," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. It was an oil tanker, massive and black against the morning sky. We used our last emergency flares and waved everything we had. For terrifying minutes, it looked like they might pass us by. Then we saw the rescue boats coming toward us. The tanker crew couldn't believe we were still alive. Only 8 of us had survived. Me, Captain Peterson, Amy, Jake, and 4 others. 12 people had died during our ordeal. When they pulled us onto the rescue boat, the Coast Guard medic asked what we'd eaten to survive so long. I had to tell them the truth. I had to explain what we'd done. The medic just nodded. "You did what you had to do," he said. "You kept those kids alive." They flew us to Anchorage for medical treatment. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital, getting my strength back and talking to counselors about what we'd been through. The story made international news. Reporters called it one of the longest survival ordeals in modern maritime history. But they didn't understand the real cost of staying alive for 42 days. I couldn't sleep for months without seeing Mrs. Johnson's face. I'd wake up tasting that strange meat and feeling sick. The doctor said I had severe PTSD, but no amount of therapy could take away the guilt. But Amy and Jake's families thanked me. They said I saved their children's lives. That helped a little. Those teenagers went back to school that fall because I made the horrible choices that kept them alive. I testified at maritime safety hearings about what happened. My experience led to new regulations requiring better communication equipment on charter boats. Maybe other people won't have to face the choices we faced. I never went fishing again. I couldn't even look at the ocean without remembering. Eventually, I moved to Colorado, as far from the sea as I could get. I'm still a janitor, still cleaning up messes and taking care of people. But I'm proud that I helped save those young lives. The cost was unimaginable, and I'll carry that trauma forever. But sometimes survival means doing things that change you forever. Sometimes being human means making choices that seem inhuman. And sometimes the only way to save a life is to sacrifice a piece of your soul. My name is Carol Mitchell, and I've been driving school buses for 22 years. Started when I was fresh out of high school, needing work that would let me stay close to home in Bethel, Alaska. I've got my commercial driver's license with passenger and school bus endorsements, plus all the safety training they make us do every year. I've driven through blizzards that would scare truckers, dealt with kids having medical emergencies, and even had a moose charge my bus once. But what happened starting in March 2024 on my route along the Kuskokwim River changed everything I thought I knew about this job. My route is Route 47, covering about 200 miles of some of the most remote roads in Alaska. I pick up kids from tiny villages and isolated homesteads scattered along the river. Some of these places you can only reach by boat in summer or snowmobile in winter. But there's this old logging road that connects most of them, built back in the 70s. It's rough, but my bus can handle it. I drive a 2018 Bluebird Vision, 66 passenger capacity, equipped with GPS tracking, two-way radio, and all the safety equipment the state requires. The kids I transport, they're tough. Native Alaskan families who've lived out here for generations. Some ride my bus for 2 hours each way just to get to school. I know every one of them by name, their families, where they live. I've been doing this route for 8 years now, and these kids are like my own. It was March 15th when I first noticed something was wrong. I was doing my morning pickup, starting at 6 a.m. like always. The weather was typical for March, cold, but not the bone-freezing cold of January. About 20 degrees, light snow. My first stop was the Alexi family cabin, about 40 miles out. 2 kids there, Jimmy and Sarah, ages 8 and 10. I pulled up to their stop, opened the door, and they climbed on like normal. "Morning, Mrs. Carroll," they said, taking their usual seats in the front. But as I was pulling away, I glanced in my mirror and saw a third child sitting in the back row. A pale girl with long black hair, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned dress, dark blue with white trim, not the kind of clothes kids wear nowadays. I stopped the bus and turned around. "Excuse me, sweetheart, what's your name? I don't have you on my list." The girl looked up at me with the biggest, darkest eyes I'd ever seen. "Emma," she said quietly. "I live in Akiak." Now, Akiak was on my route list, but it was abandoned, had been for decades. I knew this because my own grandmother used to tell stories about it. The whole village got washed out in a flood back in 1978. Nothing left but some old foundations and a cemetery. "Honey, there's nobody living in Akiak anymore," I told her gently. "Where do your parents really live?" She just stared at me. "I live at 412 River Street, Akiak. My mama says I have to go to school." I radioed back to dispatch. "This is bus 47. I've got an unregistered passenger. Kid says she lives in Akiak." Static crackled back. "Bus 47, Akiak's been empty for 40 years. You sure about the address?" I looked back at Emma. She was still sitting there, perfectly still, hands folded in her lap. Jimmy and Sarah were staring at her too, but they didn't seem surprised. It was like they'd seen her before. "I'll sort it out at school," I told dispatch, and continued my route. But here's the thing that really got to me. When I checked my passenger count that morning, I had started with 12 kids. By the time I reached the school, I counted 18, and I hadn't made any extra stops. Emma wasn't the only new face. There was a boy named Peter sitting in seat 14, wearing clothes that looked like they came from a museum. Another girl, maybe 6 years old, in seat 23. She had on a winter coat that was way too thin for Alaska weather, and her lips looked blue with cold. I tried talking to my regular kids about it during the ride. "Hey Jimmy, do you know these new kids?" Jimmy looked confused. "What new kids, Mrs. Carroll? It's the same kids as always." That's when I really started to worry. These children could clearly see the extra passengers, but they acted like they'd always been there, like it was completely normal. At school, I watched to see if the mystery kids would get off. The regular students filed out like always, backpacks and lunchboxes in hand. But Emma, Peter, and the little girl in the thin coat stayed in their seats. "Come on, kids, time for school," I called back to them. Emma shook her head. "We don't go to this school, we go to the old school." "What old school? The one in our village?" I walked back to them. "Look, I need to see some paperwork. Registration forms, emergency contacts. I can't transport students who aren't properly enrolled." That's when Emma did something that made my blood run cold. She reached into her dress pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was yellow with age, like it had been sitting in a drawer for decades. She handed it to me, and I could feel how thin and fragile it was. The paper was a school enrollment form, but it was dated 1978. Emma Ugeek, age 7, enrolled at Akiak Elementary School. Parent signature, Mary Ugeek. The ink was faded brown. "Honey, this is from 1978. That's impossible." Emma just looked at me with those dark, sad eyes. "My mama filled it out last week. I kept that paper, still have it. Had it tested later, the paper and ink really were from the 1972. The next few weeks, more children started appearing. Always dressed in old clothes, always claiming to live in villages that had been abandoned decades ago. My passenger manifest never matched my actual count. I'd start with 15 kids and end up with 22. Sometimes the numbers would change while I was driving. I'd count heads at one stop and get a different number at the next, even though nobody got on or off. I started taking pictures with my phone to document what was happening. The regular kids showed up fine in the photos, but the extra children? Sometimes they looked pale and see-through. Sometimes they didn't appear in the pictures at all, even though I could see them clear as day sitting right there. The weird thing was, they were good kids. Polite, quiet, never caused any trouble. They'd sit in their assigned seats and stare out the windows without blinking. They never talked to the other children, never asked for anything, but they'd answer if I spoke to them directly. I started keeping a notebook, writing down their names and the addresses they gave me. Emma from Akiak, Peter from Napakiak Station, little Susan from Chuathbaluk, all places that had been evacuated or destroyed years ago. One afternoon, I decided to drive to the address Emma had given me, 412 River Street, Akiak. I'd been to the ruins of Akiak before. It was just off my regular route. When the flood hit in 1978, it took out most of the village. The river changed course and washed away the main street. But when I got there with Emma still on the bus, she pointed to an empty patch of grass near the riverbank. "That's my house," she said. "The white one with blue shutters." There was nothing there, just weeds and some old concrete blocks that might have been a foundation once. But Emma described the house in perfect detail. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with yellow wallpaper, a porch where her dad would sit and smoke his pipe. I went to the Historical Society in Bethel and looked up property records for Akiak. Sure enough, there had been a white house with blue shutters at 412 River Street, owned by Frank and Mary Ugeek from 1975 to 1978. They had one daughter, named Emma. According to the records, Emma Ugeek drowned in the flood that destroyed the village. She was 7 years old. Her body was never recovered. That's when I understood what was happening on my bus. These weren't regular children. They were the spirits of kids who died in disasters throughout Alaska's history. Kids who never got to finish school, never got to grow up. I contacted some elders in the local native community, people who knew the old stories. They weren't surprised at all when I told them what was happening. "Those children," said Elder Robert Charlie, "they died before their time. In our tradition, their spirits stay connected to the earth, especially to places of learning. School buses, classrooms, these are sacred spaces for children. They're still trying to get their education." He explained that many of these disasters weren't just accidents. Government negligence, environmental damage, corporate greed. A lot of those old villages were abandoned because someone in authority didn't care enough to protect them. The spirits were angry about being forgotten. "They want justice," he said. "They want their stories to be remembered." The pale children started bringing me letters after that, folded pieces of old paper with messages for family members who were still alive. The letters contained information that only the dead children could know. Family secrets, final words they never got to say, locations of important items that had been lost. I delivered several of these letters. The families were shocked. How could a 7-year-old who died in 1978 know that her cousin would grow up to become a teacher? How could she know about the family heirloom that had been lost in the flood and never mentioned to anyone? But every letter checked out. Every detail was accurate. The children started making demands. They wanted me to take them to their old villages so they could be properly buried. They said their bodies were still out there, never recovered, never given proper ceremonies. Their spirits couldn't rest. I organized search parties with tribal members and state archaeologists. We found dozens of small graves in the ruins of abandoned villages. Each time we conducted a proper burial ceremony, 1 or 2 of the ghost children would disappear from my bus. But more kept appearing. Children from disasters going back to the 1800s. Victims of diseases, floods, fires, government relocations. Alaska has a dark history of communities being destroyed or abandoned, and apparently every child who died in those disasters was still trying to get to school. My bus was becoming overcrowded with passengers from different time periods. Kids in fur parkas from the early 1900s sitting next to children in polyester jackets from the 1982. The living students were getting scared. Some parents wanted to pull their kids from the route, but I couldn't stop driving. These remote communities depended on school transportation. There was no other way to get kids to school. The ghost children started interfering with my bus. The engine would rev on its own, trying to force me to drive to their destinations instead of school. The steering wheel would turn in my hands. I lost control several times and nearly crashed into the river. I radioed for help, but how do you explain to your supervisor that dead children are trying to hijack your bus? The local tribal council performed a blessing ceremony on my vehicle. It helped for about a week, but then the spirits came back, stronger than ever. They brought adult ghosts with them, parents and teachers who had also died in the disasters. My bus was packed with transparent passengers from across a century of Alaska's forgotten tragedies. The regular kids were terrified, but they still needed to get to school. I had to keep driving. Emma, the first ghost I'd met, became their spokesperson. She explained that they would continue riding until all of Alaska's forgotten victims were remembered, until their stories were told and their deaths were acknowledged. "We just want people to know we existed," she said. "We want our families to remember us." So that's what I'm doing now. I still drive Route 47 every day, transporting both living children and the spirits of the dead. I keep detailed records of every ghost passenger I encounter, their names, their stories, how they died. I'm working with researchers and historians to document these forgotten disasters and make sure these children's stories are finally told. It's not easy, sharing my bus with the dead, but these kids suffered enough in life. The least I can do is give them a ride to school, even if they're never going to make it there. Some people think I'm crazy, but I have the photos, the letters, the historical records, and most importantly, I have my duty as a school bus driver. Every child deserves a safe ride to school, even the ones who died decades ago still trying to get there. I've been driving for 22 years, and I'll keep driving as long as these children need me. Because in the end, we're all just trying to get somewhere. And sometimes, the journey is more important than the destination. My name is Miguel Santos, and I've been a cook for 15 years. Started in Anchorage when I was 17, worked my way up from washing dishes to running whole kitchens. I can handle a dinner rush for 200 people without breaking a sweat. I've worked through kitchen fires, power outages, and food poisoning scares. But what happened in Circle, Alaska, during February 2024 made me quit cooking for 6 months. Some things you see behind a grill stay with you forever. Circle sits on the Yukon River, 160 miles northeast of Fairbanks, population 104 on a good day. It's one of Alaska's most isolated towns, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and the nearest hospital is 3 hours away. I took the job at Murphy's Diner because I wanted quiet. Big mistake. In places that small and remote, quiet doesn't mean peaceful. It means nobody hears you scream. The diner was the only restaurant in town. Just me, an older waitress named Carol, and Murphy himself, who mostly stayed in the back doing paperwork. We served maybe 30 people on busy days. The building was old, built in the 1942, with a flat roof that creaked when the wind hit it wrong. The kitchen was cramped but functional. Gas range, 2 fryers, a walk-in cooler that barely kept things cold. Nothing fancy, but it worked. February in Circle means 20 hours of darkness and temperatures that hit 40 below. The kind of cold that makes your breath freeze in your lungs. People came to the diner not just for food, but for warmth and company. Hot coffee, thick stew, anything to fight off the winter. That's what made what happened so much worse. These people trusted us. They came to our place to feel safe. It started on a Tuesday night. Frank Morrison came in around 7, ordered his usual billet boulet, rare steak and eggs. Frank was a mechanic, lived about 3 blocks away in a blue house with Christmas lights still up from December. He paid his bill, said goodnight to Carol, and walked out into the snow. His truck was found the next morning, engine still running, driver's door wide open. His dinner was still in a to-go box on the passenger seat, the steak barely touched and still warm. Nobody thought much of it at first. Frank drank too much sometimes. Maybe he got confused in the dark, wandered off somewhere. The state troopers came up from Fairbanks, looked around for 2 days, found nothing. No tracks in the snow leading away from his truck, no blood, no signs of a struggle. Frank Morrison just vanished. Then it happened again. Sarah Chen, a teacher at the tiny school, came in Friday for lunch, ordered a bacon cheeseburger, medium rare. Left around 2 in the afternoon. Her car was found that evening in front of the post office, engine running, keys in the ignition. Her burger was still on the front seat, 1 bite taken out of it. The meat was still pink in the middle, still warm. That's when people started talking. 2 disappearances in 1 week, both customers who'd eaten at our place. Both found with their food still warm, their vehicles still running. Both had ordered meat cooked rare or medium rare. I started paying attention to things I'd never noticed before, like how cold the diner got right before people disappeared. I kept detailed logs of everything. What people ordered, when they left, what happened to them. Professional habit from years of food safety training. The pattern was clear once you looked for it. Every person who vanished had ordered meat that was still bloody in the middle. The well-done burger people, the vegetarians, the fish eaters, they all made it home fine. Old Pete Kowalski, who'd lived in Circle for 60 years, told me about something called the Hunger Walker. According to him, it was created during the gold rush in the 1892. Miners got snowed in for months with no food. Some resorted to cannibalism to survive. Pete said one of them didn't stop eating human flesh even after the rescue came. The thing that used to be a man wandered the wilderness, drawn to the smell of blood and the sound of people eating. I thought Pete was just telling stories to spook the new guy. Then the temperature drops started. It would happen suddenly, usually around sunset. The diner would be warm 1 minute, then freezing cold the next. I'd check the thermostat, still set to 72 degrees. The gas heater would be running full blast, but the air would feel like a freezer. Customers would start shivering, wrapping their coats tighter, complaining about the chill. That's when I knew someone wasn't going home that night. The sounds on the roof started a week later. Heavy footsteps, like someone walking around up there. But the steps were wrong, too far apart, like whatever was making them had legs longer than any human. Then came the scratching. Long, slow scrapes across the metal roofing, like massive claws testing for weak spots. I'd grab a flashlight and check outside, but there was never anything there. Just my footprints in the snow and the wind. Carol heard it too, but she pretended she didn't. Old building, she'd say, pipes expanding and contracting. But I saw how she'd glance at the ceiling when the sound started, how she'd find reasons to stay busy near the front door where she could run if she needed to. I started closing early, making excuses about equipment, problems, or supply shortages, anything to get people out of the diner before sunset. But it didn't matter. Whatever was hunting our customers had memorized their faces. It followed them home. James Wright disappeared from his own driveway. Linda Torres vanished between her car and her front door. Both had eaten at the diner that day. Both had ordered rare meat. The thing wasn't just hunting at the restaurant anymore. Bull. It was tracking anyone who'd eaten the bloody meat we served. That's when I saw it for the first time. I was working late, doing inventory in the walk-in cooler. The temperature gauge had been acting up all week, showing impossible readings. I came out around midnight to check the dining room, make sure everything was locked up. That's when I noticed the windows had fogged up from the inside, even though the heat was running. Something was pressed against the glass. At first, I thought it was just shadows from the streetlight. Then I realized the shadows were moving. I grabbed a flashlight and moved closer to the front window. What I saw made my hands shake so hard I almost dropped the light. It was tall, maybe 8 feet, and impossibly thin. Its arms and legs were too long for its body, like someone had stretched a person on a rack. The skin was pale gray, the color of old ice, and steam was rising from its body despite the cold. But the worst part was its face. The thing had human features, but wrong. The eye sockets were too deep, too dark. The mouth was too wide, filled with teeth like broken glass. Black liquid dripped from between its lips and froze in the snow. It was staring through the window, studying the layout of the dining room, memorizing every table and chair. I stood there for maybe 30 seconds, too scared to move. Then it saw me looking back. Its head tilted to one side, and I heard something that sounded like laughter. Cold, wet laughter that seemed to come from inside my own head. I blinked, and it was gone. The next morning, I found claw marks on every window and door. Long gouges in the wood and metal, like something had been testing for the weakest points. Behind the diner, half buried in the snow, I found things that made my stomach turn. Personal belongings from the missing people. Wallets, jewelry, pieces of clothing. But no bodies. Never any bodies. I installed motion sensor cameras around the building, the kind hunters use for wildlife. The footage showed the creature approaching every night around midnight. It would circle the diner like a wolf around a campfire, testing doors and windows, learning our routines. On the recordings, you could see its breath steaming in the cold air. Watch it arrange animal bones in strange patterns around the building like it was marking territory. But the strangest part was that it was smart, really smart. It learned to avoid the cameras after a few nights, staying just out of range. It figured out which windows had the best view of the kitchen, where I stored the meat. It was planning something. I tried to warn people, but who was going to believe me? The few times I mentioned what I'd seen, folks just nodded politely and changed the subject. In a town that small, you don't rock the boat. You especially don't tell people their favorite diner is being stalked by a monster that eats human appetite. Only I could see it clearly anyway. Maybe because I was exposed to the smell of cooking meat all day, every day. Maybe the scents that clung to my clothes and skin made me visible to it somehow. Whatever the reason, I was the only one who knew what was really happening. The creature started leaving me messages. Arranged bones spelled out words in the snow behind the diner. Hungry was the first one. Then, soon. Then just my name, Miguel, spelled out in caribou ribs and wolf vertebrae. It knew who I was. It was communicating with me. I realized it was planning to come inside. All those nights of testing doors and windows, learning the layout, it was preparing for a major attack. It wanted multiple victims at once, maybe the whole dinner crowd during the busy evening rush. I couldn't let that happen. On a Thursday night in late February, I sent Carol home early and stayed at the diner alone. I armed myself with every knife in the kitchen and waited. The building got cold around 11:30, cold enough to see my breath. Then came the footsteps on the roof, heavier than usual, more urgent. At exactly midnight, the front door exploded inward. The creature filled the doorway, and seeing it up close was worse than any nightmare. Its joints bent the wrong way. Its fingers ended in claws as long as kitchen knives. When it moved, I could hear its bones clicking together like wind chimes. But the worst part was its voice. It spoke in the voices of everyone who'd disappeared. Frank Morrison's gruff mechanic voice, Sarah Chen's soft teacher tones, James Wright's nervous laugh. It was taunting me, trying to confuse me, using the voices of the dead to break my mind. "Miguel," it said in Frank's voice, "why won't you let me eat?" I grabbed the propane torch we used for creme brulee and fired it up. The creature recoiled from the flame, making a sound like steam escaping from a radiator. Fire heard it, maybe because it was a thing of ice and winter. For 10 minutes we fought in that cramped diner. I swung at it with knives and burning rags while it tried to corner me with those impossible long arms. Every time I got the torch close to its skin, it would hiss and pull back. Black liquid poured from its mouth and nose, freezing the moment it hit the floor. Finally, I managed to drive it back outside. Before it disappeared into the darkness, it spoke one more time in Sarah Chen's voice. "This won't stop me. I'll come back when you're weaker." I knew it was telling the truth. The next morning, I made the hardest decision of my life. I doused the diner in cooking oil and propane and burned it to the ground. 15 years of cooking experience. My job, my income, I destroyed it all to deny that thing its hunting ground. The state fire marshal ruled it an electrical fire. Murphy collected the insurance money and moved to Anchorage. The disappearances stopped immediately. No more missing people, no more abandoned cars with warm food inside. I left Circle that same week. But this story doesn't have a clean ending. I've been traveling ever since, working as a cook in small-town diners across Alaska and northern Canada. And sometimes, in the coldest, most isolated places, I see the signs again. Claw marks on windows, bone arrangements in the snow, the temperature dropping for no reason right before sunset. The hunger walker is still out there, moving from place to place, drawn to anywhere people gather to eat and feel safe. It feeds on human appetite, on the simple pleasure of a hot meal on a cold night. And I'm still following it, warning other cooks and restaurant owners when I can, teaching them what to watch for. If you work in a diner in a small, isolated town, pay attention to your customers' orders. Notice who orders rare meat and bloody steaks. Watch for sudden temperature drops and strange sounds on your roof. Install good locks and keep fire extinguishers handy. And if you ever see a tall, thin figure pressing its face against your windows at midnight, don't try to be a hero like I did. Just run.